Could you say it? So you were talking about your mom, and she went to Lincoln?
Yeah.
Crenshaw.
Right, the Crenshaws. Yeah.
The Crenshaws.
That's my family.
Yeah, there's history of your family, man, because they're part of that
right,
too.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Okay, so the way it worked out, so I know Reverend Carl. You can come back in.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
So Reverend Carl talked about Lincoln and the schools kind of being integrated. So first, when he talked about Distant, he talked about Distant Elementary School.
Okay.
But the way it was, if you grew up in Tacony or if you grew up in Holmesburg, which is a little further north, even though you had your own elementary schools, you all ended up at the same high school, which was Abraham Lincoln High School.
Oh.
And so my mom and her siblings, they grew up in Holmesburg, a little further north. But they met the blacks who were from Tacony when they got to Lincoln High School. And just like he talked about it, for my mom's graduating class, she said it was the biggest black graduating class they'd ever had at the time she graduated. There were 4 of them. 4.
Yeah.
Yes. So in other words, were the schools integrated? Yeah.
Yeah.
They were integrated, but it's just because
sort
of. Sort of. Because there weren't a lot of blacks out here. So
yeah.
And for a while, there were some interesting things, like the fact that Reverend Carl mentioned that his relatives, they went to elementary school at Distant.
Yeah.
Distant is further over. Forest is actually the closer of the 2 schools. But they were pushing the black families to Distant for a long time.
Yeah.
By the time my generation came up, because I at least went to elementary and middle school around here, we ended up going to Forest.
Oh, okay.
And
and so you grew up around here too?
Yeah, I grew up 2 blocks that way.
2 blocks that way?
Edmond Street, yeah.
So this is stomping grounds for you?
Yeah, it is.
He crawled down the street as a kid.
Right. We lived around here until I was going to high school, and it wasn't because my mom wanted to leave. Because like all of her roots were here. My family was still at the house over on Keystone Street, where a lot of the other black families live today.
Okay.
We don't have the house anymore. But my mom, she wanted to move away. It's that there wasn't a house that she liked in this area for sale at the time. And I went to Central. So she's like, well, maybe we can find a place that's easier for you to get to school from.
Sure.
So we ended up moving like just maybe a 5-minute drive that way.
Okay.
But yeah, my family was here.
And not only that, his family is a part of the new development down on Keystone Street. The Crenshaws. He's your grandfather.
Yeah, my grandfather,
His grandfather and grandmother lived down the street. So I grew up playing with, well, actually your aunt, your cousins were younger than me, but we grew up with the Crenshaws.
Yeah. So I'll explain. So how my family ended up in this area is that my grandfather, it's a slightly different story because my grandfather was already here. He was from Louisiana, so he's not one of those families that came up as part of that migration, but he did come from Louisiana, from small rural Louisiana to Philadelphia because of the Great Migration, and there's better job opportunities, from where he was from. They pretty much could only be sharecroppers, and while they were business owners at a time, with all that happened in Reconstruction with black people losing their rights, he's witnessed a lot of that firsthand. So he came over here, married my grandmother, and then my grandmother died after they had their 6 kids. But so as a single father, he bounced kind of from job to job, and he ended up settling in on a job at the Penn Forge Steel Mill, which was another one that was out here. So when he worked for Penn Forge, he moved the family to a house that he was able to rent in Holmesburg. And so that's how my mom and all of them were raised in Holmesburg. And then what happened is that, with all the racism and all, my grandfather was never actually able to buy a home, and they kept doing interesting things with his pension at the steel mill, because he was older, where like, let's say you would be vested at 10 years. They would like fire him at 9 years and then give him his job back.
Oh no.
But then and every time he was close to being vested, he'd lose his job. So there were a lot of situations like that, but he didn't have anything he could do about it. This is a single man trying to raise six kids at the time. So by the time they moved to this neighborhood, Tacony, they actually moved here when the kids were all grown. And my mom and her siblings pulled their money together to buy their father a house.
Oh, wow.
Because they're like, he's gone through all this trouble, struggling to get us together, to keep us together, which was my grandmother's dying wish, to keep her kids together.
Right.
He struggled and fought and did all of that. He got taken advantage of so many times. They wanted their father to have a house. But if you listen to the story, and I know you're going to talk to my mom eventually, they did not like the house on Keystone. They felt like there were too many of them. They're like, we're all grown. Right. There are too many of like, the
house wasn't big enough or something?
No, it wasn't big enough. And they said, like, you know, it needed
Because you're all
work.
big people now. You're not little kids, so
Right.
people
And-
need space.
Yeah, and the house needed work.
Yeah.
And yes, my grandfather was a bit of a carpenter. You hear some of the stories like on Frankfurt Avenue, which is another thoroughfare up there. My grandfather reportedly helped build a lot of those buildings on Frankfurt Avenue.
Oh, wow.
But he never really got paid what he should have, because you know how he couldn't get the like contractors' licenses and all back then. They blocked black people out of the licensing. So he did a lot of work, but he didn't really get the credit for it. So just saying that was a lot of the theme, even with him getting the house. He wanted to renovate it himself. They're like, you're not going to get around to it. Don't do this. But they respected his wishes. He signed the paperwork behind him. And so they moved in there in the 60s. And that's why when people talk about the Crenshaws in this area, it goes back that far. But our ties to Northeast Philadelphia predate our ties to Tacony.
Wow.
But that's like when he said like people like either knew each other from school or like their parents and grandparents worked together. It's true that my grandfather moved around here because he knew a lot of the other men in the community from his work at the steel mill, from his work as a carpenter.
Okay.
So he thought it was a good place to move his family.
Sure, because he knew the people in the neighborhood could help with all 6 kids. Oh, well, he was already grown.
They were grown,
They were grown,
but he still knew the people
Knew
in the
people,
community.
yeah, that
he felt
helps.
good about living in that area.
Right.
And my mom, when I was talking to her about this earlier, she was telling me some stories about, you know, my grandfather's interactions with different families, how they all loved him. They all have stories about taking him to games and things like that.
What was your grandfather's name?
Jack Crenshaw.
Jack Crenshaw. Good.
Wow, that brings back.
That's a good name.
Right, yeah. He died in 1984, though.
Okay.
That's when he passed.
Yeah, he died because there are pictures of me and my cousin Andre. We were holding both, that we were both at his funeral, and there are
Okay.
pictures of us being the little babies in people's arms at his funeral.
Yeah, because you got to remember, there's years between him and I.
Right?
See, I'll be 62 in October, you know, and I grew up. I'm even older than his older. I'm older than his older cousins.
Oh.
Like George was a kid. When I
Right,
was a kid.
exactly. George being that, for you to know him, he's the one that founded your will.
Oh.
So George is he was born in 1963.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, I'm born in '59.
right. So you're close to his sister's age.
Died.
His dad was born in 1960.
Yeah, Don. I mean,
Right.
Yeah.
So let me ask you both this. If there's
Yes.
something you could tell people that you want people to remember about the Black experience in Tacony, what would it be?
Well, I think for me, one big thing is that we were already here. And I know that, you know, it seems like a rather elementary thing, but you have to understand that for Northeast Philadelphia was historically seen as a white part of the city.
Yeah.
And so not just our interactions with white people out here, but even when we talk to other people from other parts of the city of Philadelphia, they'd be like, oh, well, how long has your family been out there?
Exactly.
Like, the thought was that this area was never integrated, that black people weren't here. So it's almost like we had to give some basic level of education to anybody who asked, like, no, we were here because our families settled here because there were jobs. No, we don't have more money. No, we don't think we're better. No, it's just the only difference between us and you is that our family settled in this area for jobs, your family settled in that area for jobs. Because there's a lot of misconceptions about what it meant to be black in this area, when we got here, what our lives were like. It's like, no, our lives were just like yours. We're descended from people who settled a little further north in the city.
Right.
To give you a tidbit, one of the most, I guess, accomplished men is from Holmesburg. Sid Booker. They're the Sid Booker's restaurant on Broad Street.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he's from Holmesburg.
Oh, okay.
And you know, he's from Holmesburg, and that family is the same family connected with the families that grew up. Tacony, Holmesburg, Tacony, and Frankfurt. Their interactions.
Right.
Our churches are even sister churches to one another because of that community. So there's a line of communication. I mean, there's a familiar spirit, and you know, comfortable and you know, camaraderie amongst families. The other thing is that when Wilson Good ran for office, our family, the Burke family, owned a bar tavern, a lounge on State Road, because actually the blacks were on State Road, Princeton, maybe some tulip in here in Hagerman. That's where the major areas, and those like National Street, those streets over there in West Sonoma. We owned a bar, we owned the lounge, and when Wilson Good was running for office as mayor, well, my mother, she got him to come up and campaign because he didn't even know there were blacks up here,
Right.
and that drew votes up here.
And
It
right.
involved his voting up here, the blacks to get involved in voting for him.
Wow.
So that was kind
So
of
Wilson Good didn't even know.
No, he didn't, and I can verify that
Oh
because
my goodness.
something. So years later, when I was in grad school at Rutgers, I had a chance to work on a project that by then former Mayor Wilson Good was on, and he asked where I was from. You know, as a black guy, product of the public school district of Philadelphia. You know, in a doctoral program, and when I said Tacony, he was like, not the hood. Exact words, not the hood.
Yeah.
And I remember like, what?
Yeah.
And I went home and I told my mom about it. And she
So-
was hurt because she remembered a lot of efforts that you were
Yeah.
talking about
Yeah.
how much Tacony rallied behind him,
Yeah.
how much Black Tacony rallied behind him.
Yeah. So that's a tidbit. That's
Right.
historical.
Let me stop recording.